The next item is oral communications from the public. Members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the committee? Seeing none. The Facilities Subcommittee is the next item. At the January business meeting, the committee decided to establish a Facilities Subcommittee and asked that any members interested in serving on the subcommittee send an email by January 19th. There are 3 members that were interested: Caitlin Hunter, Matt Landers, and Narissa Wallen. Unless there are any objections, I would suggest that these 3 members are appointed to serve on the subcommittee until May 2024, when all subcommittees are reorganized after the election. Can I have a motion to appoint Caitlin Hunter, Matt Landers, and Narissa Wallen to the Facilities Subcommittee until May 24th?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? The next item is the FY25 operating budget development. I will turn this over to Superintendent Brian Forget and Director of Finance and Operations Kyle Warren.
One quick question on the facilities. Do you have a interim chair who's going to organize the first meeting, or would you like me to do that? I'm happy to do that. I'll pull some times and get you together. Thank you. So we are back again tonight. Again, we are meeting every Wednesday night through March 13th, I believe, except for the budget is going to be approved on a Tuesday night via Zoom on February 13th. So we tonight do not have any new information on expenditures. The only further refinement of expenditures that we are expecting is our medical. We got the rates, we got the range in where what we budgeted at 6 is roughly the average of the trust. So we feel like we're in the ballpark. The minimum was 2 point something. So we could go down, we could go up. But at this point, we haven't made any adjustment to that. So as we had said last week, the goal for this week is to share with you the information that we learned today, which is from the state. We got the governor's budget, which provides Chapter 70 numbers, but more importantly, not more importantly, equally as important, we have our first look at our foundation enrollments along with each town's minimum local contribution, which apportions our assessment to our member towns. So there are 3 documents in front of you, or for those who are our viewing audience, are posted on board docs. Those were just posted a couple hours ago because the governor just released her budget a few hours ago. So those were not published when we posted the meeting last week. So I'm going to hand it over to Kyle to walk through these documents to provide the context, and then we'll continue the discussion about the impact of these and where we want to go next.
Thank you. So before I actually jump into these 3 documents themselves, again, one of them gives 3 different assessment scenarios, and then the other 2 documents show a historical of the minimum local contributions, the required minimum local contributions, and then the current year and historical enrollment information. And from a technical perspective, how our assessments are calculated, the math of it, just wanted to walk through that real quick, where Mass General Law requires us to have a balanced budget every year, where our operating expenditures, we have an equal amount of operating revenues. So when we look at our operating revenues, there's 2 components. There's what we call other revenues. Those are going to be things like interest income, Chapter 70 state aid, Medicaid reimbursements. So those are other income. And then we have assessments. The assessments being the balance or the difference between the budget and other revenues, if that makes sense. And then when we get to the actual calculation of the assessments themselves, there's 2 components as well. We take the total assessment And then each community has identified by the state the required minimum local contribution. I won't even begin to go into the calculation of that. It's essentially what the state deems a community's ability to pay for an assessment, the short of it. So we have a total assessment, we have the minimum local contributions, and then the difference is allocated to the communities based on enrollment figures, foundation enrollment. So here you can see, with that in mind, the first two sheets, I'll go over the enrollment figures first. That's going to be the two-pager. At the top, have this year's current enrollments. That, again, has multiple layers to it. It's not just actual students in the seats. They layer on the students in the seats, as well as students who choice out of the district, whether it be attending another public school or a charter school, and a couple of other factors there as well, out-of-district special education placements. But to keep it simple, looking at that chart right at the top, Newbury this year has 617 students, Rowley 708, Salisbury 831, for a total of 2,156. The key here is going to be the shifts from last year, because that, when we get to the last sheet, you can see how it disproportionately assigns the assessment to various communities. It's not just a one-for-one increase or one-for-one change. So Newbury, every community's enrollments dropped this year. Newbury was down 17, Rowley was down 18, and Salisbury was down 33. So I think it's nice to look at the second page there, where it gives the 10-year historical. You can see at the top line the FY25 figures and the FY24 figures below it. Last year was 2,224 students. Again, this year, 2,156. So these shares are going to flow into that assessment calculation. If I could, I'll take questions on that sheet maybe first, or you want to jump in?
Can I just note, in the table for each of the towns where the percentage calculation, the change from prior year, the formulas are off. So the fiscal year in the percent of the total share is accurate. But for example, in Newbury, fiscal '24, they went from 28.51% to 28.62%. So they actually increased 0.11% of the total pie. So those formulas just didn't carry. So we just need to recorrect those top two lines for each of the towns, and we will reproduce this document and get it to you. But the calculations are all still accurate.
And that, thank you. The next sheet, the required minimum local contributions. So here we're giving a 2-year comparative, the current year FY25, or next year, sorry. FY25 versus FY24. Again, this is a state calculated figure. So you can see each community's share of the required minimum local contribution, the increase over FY24, and that percentage increase. I'll just leave that as it is because I think this is going to flow into the final sheet. So with all that in mind, getting to the one with it's a little prettier looking, kind of. Anywho, starting at the top. So a key metric we like to highlight every year is how the required minimum local contributions and the changes in enrollment have create a disproportionate shift for each one of the communities. Last year, for FY24, the town of Rowley had the most significant increase proportionally. This year, it's going to be Newbury who's experiencing that. So this chart right at the top, what it does is it takes our FY24 budget and shows if we were to recalculate the FY24 budget based on the FY25 enrollments and the FY25 minimum local contributions, how would that reallocate the budget? Because essentially for FY25, that's our starting point. Before we add anything, any of our additional costs, this is where each community stands. So you could see if we were to reallocate the budget based on those figures, Newbury would, right out of the gates, increase 172,000, Rowley increase 32,000, and Salisbury would see a savings of 205,000. Certainly the most financially favorable for Salisbury in that case. Does that make sense? Any questions on that concept? Okay. So now that we have our starting point, we want to jump into 3 different scenarios of what the assessments could look like for discussion purposes. So in the green chart at the top, item number 1, we wanted as a starting point the budget proposal that was submitted and presented last week that had a total increase of 2.6 million, 2,613,579. Offsetting that is going to be 131,400 of additional Chapter 70 revenues that we found out about today. That's guaranteed. We know we're going to get it. These charts below include no other changes in assumptions. It assumes all other revenues are level from this year. So the net of the 2.6 offset by the 131,000 of Chapter 70 equals just shy of 2.5 million. So that shows us what the assessments would be based on that proposal from last week. You can see it would yield an increase for Newbury of 883,000 or 7.8%. Rowley, an increase of 847,000 or 6.72%. And then Salisbury, an increase of 751,000 or 4.92% based on that proposal. The last 2 charts there, scenario number 2 and scenario number 3. Scenario number 2 would be if our assessments increased by $2 million instead of the 2.6 in the chart above. Now, if we were to achieve that $2 million increase in assessment, we would have to further trim the proposal that was presented last week by an additional 482,000. If we did that, you can see all the way to the right what the increases would yield. I don't know if it's helpful to read through each of the numbers, or 745,000 for Newbury, 6.6%, 689,000 for Rowley, 5.47%, Salisbury, 565,000, 3.7%. And lastly, in blue, scenario number 3, what it would be if the assessments increased 1.5 million. If we achieved that assessment level, we would have to have additional reductions of 982,000 from the proposal that was submitted last week. And that would yield all the way to the right, bottom right corner there, an increase for Newbury of 600,000, which would be 5.36%. Rowley, approximately 520,000, 4.16%. Salisbury, 373,000, which would be 2.44%. I'll pause there.
Can I just add, so we deciding what to show as a reference point, right? We chose the proposal as that we set out last week as the high water mark, knowing that you can extrapolate and do math if the number was to go higher than that. But if we went to 3 million, say as an example, we take assessments in at least 2 of the towns over $1 million, and we didn't want to put that on paper. So, but that obviously the discussion, these are starting points for a discussion.
Is there anybody who would like to start the conversation?
can start the conversation, sure. So I was kind of actually relieved to see these numbers today, because I think the big fear was that it was going to be like last year, right, where one town got hit so much harder than the other towns did. And this is, all things considered, I feel like relatively even. I mean, could it get closer? Yes. But is it pretty darn close to kind of evenly distributing any increase across the three towns? Yes, it is. We always know that things are going to rise and fall. There's going to be a town that gets hit harder every year, and there's a town that's going to get hit the least every year. That's just the nature of kind of having three towns. You're going to have a high, middle, and low. I personally appreciate when it can give a town that's been taking a hit a break and kind of put somebody else in the spotlight, because it's hard when it's the same town year after year, I feel like. You know, I know based on the numbers that Rowley's giving us in the past, this is probably still going to be, you know, something that's hard for them as the second town that's very close to kind of the top town as the assessment calculations go. But, you know, I mean, I feel like we are where we are. It's not a bad place to be. And, you know, we just start having those conversations that are going to take us into traditional budget season. I know that we were lucky to dodge the 9C cuts that came through from the state relatively recently. It was hard to see almost flat today and see some districts walking back. I mean, not to whatever about our neighboring districts, but Newburyport having an almost $1 million increase last year and getting $65,000 in Chapter 70 this year. I cannot imagine, like, that is just unfathomable, having to swing through those highs and lows. I think it's going to be really hard. So I think it's a tough budget year for the state, and it showed it, because almost everything is flat or very small increases.
So I think we have to give guidance to the administration as to which one of the scenarios. Is that what you need tonight?
So, try that one more time. Sorry, we're trying to figure out the live stream isn't working, so we're just trying to get that up and working. So again, this is different, right? This is different in that we're meeting every Wednesday night, and so in order for us to continue the process, similar to what Narissa said, if we're going to be making progress, right, we've got 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks. We've got the 31st, the 6th, and the 13th, right? So we've got 2 more meetings before we then put together a tentative proposal, and you approve that on Tuesday, the 13th. So the goal is to have a document that's representative of the will of this committee as far as what we want to put forward, cognizant of the fact that the high water mark is what we always set in the tentative budget, in that as things continue to progress, whether it be hopefully we get wonderful news about our medical not reimbursement, our medical renewal, and we can shave 100,000 there. I mean, it's not going to be hundreds of thousands, even to go down to 2%, which is our best case scenario. There aren't a lot of other things as far as our set costs that are adjusting, even in the week, right? Things change on a daily basis, and in a week since we've last met, we do this every year, there's nothing else that we're confident adjusting. These figures, these 3 scenarios that Kyle presented are based off of what was presented last week, that we've put on the table, their viability, as well as what some potential other reductions might be to prepare, so that when we get to the tentative budget and then on down to the final budget, right, we could lose 300,000 in regional transportation. It could happen, right? Those of you who've been around a while remember it well. And we don't have any other revenue. Medicaid, we've been aggressive, right? The interest income, we've been aggressive on all these assumptions. We don't have any other place to turn. We don't have ESSER to fall back on now. We can make changes to things like what we used to do with our, tapping into excess and deficiency and not funding our stabilization. But these are the things the decisions we had to make previously that landed us in the situation we're in now. And we need to make better choices. And so those types of things, there isn't savings. It could be short-term savings for long-term pain. So other than things like medical that may shift in the weeks ahead, I think we largely have the picture in front of us about what we're going to be dealing with. We know what the impact will be to the towns. And so now it's a matter of if we can leave here tonight and we have a clear understanding of what you want. Certainly, if the committee wants to have a discussion about reductions, where they believe reductions, where you all believe reductions should come from, thoughts, advice, all that, absolutely. But I think the most important thing is you give us a target to say, I would like you to come back next week, which is the 31st of January, with adjustments to get us to a number. Tell me what that number is, and we'll present to you, okay, our best thinking to get to that number is this. And we can have a discussion, then we can do it again on the 6th, then we can have a discussion, and then we bring it back to you on the 17th as a tentative budget. That is my request.
Does anybody have any, the thing that I want to make sure that we don't touch is the stabilization account, because going forward for any new building, we need that for our bond rating. So I want to make sure that we're not touching that to offset.
Can I suggest this? And maybe, I don't know if this stops the flow or helps it. Can we start with what you feel is a viable target number? Right? So from there, I think then we can talk about the cuts we've proposed, the reductions, and again, some of these would be reductions we'd be making regardless of the year. We talked about sixth grade, that would not be one I would be reducing in any typical year. But if we can talk about the target, I think that would better inform our discussion about where thoughts on specific reductions.
So can I ask, are you assuming that everything you presented to us in the decreases from last week would stick and you're looking for additional areas that we want, or you're asking us to comment on the original?
I think every week here forward, we're coming back with a clean slate. So you have what that's not a good way to describe it, as far as reductions, right? So last week, we brought to you a budget that totaled $2.613 million in new expenditures. You now have those assessments in front of you. It's not picking from an à la carte menu. It's saying, here's what I think knowing what the assessments are, it doesn't have to be 1.52 or 2. Oh my gosh, I can't even see that without my glasses anymore. 2.482. It doesn't have to be those exact numbers, but to be able to say, here's what I think as a high water mark we should be, here's our relative target. And then from that point, being able to say, to Linda's point, stabilization was assumed, right? The additional 75 was assumed as an increase in last week's presentation. We can go through things that maybe there are assumptions made that folks would like to see not included in there, or some cuts that you would like to pull out and others in. And again, I think Narissa made the point last week of the nitty gritty, that's my job to bring to you, and then you get to say you like it or you don't. You don't have to have those hard conversations. But the guidance is what's helpful. So, but to your point, Aaron, there is no starting point. The starting point was just to show you the impact. The impact, period. Sorry, that sounded like a question at the end.
So I don't, and I'm going back to last meeting, and I don't mean to throw Paul, oh boy, sorry. I don't mean to throw Paul under the bus, but I was actually thinking about what you said last week for 7 days. So I think when we left last meeting, and please correct me, we were looking at the sheet you gave us last week, and we were all kind of concerned with the level of cuts, and I know Paul Goldner said it.
Just don't talk with me.
Thank you, Erin. I think we were all kind of, I would like to see the 2.482, which is what the high water mark, and to see some alternatives with that number. Because I think last week that was a discussion we were kind of going around, where we were looking at the proposal using that number, correct?
Yes.
Yep, using the number in green. Yep. And we were looking at maybe coming up with some alternatives from there. So for me, that would kind of be the starting point of the conversation, is using that same number, and then the alternatives or different, just, I don't like, yeah, some different or some options, or just maybe like a larger discussion around that, but keeping at this number for as long as we can. Which I understand may be just one more week, but I would like to definitely investigate it for at least one more week before we jump down. And I don't know how anyone else feels about that.
Does anybody else?
I spoke long enough last.
I definitely don't think we can do 2 or 3, but I kind of would like to see like a 1A, maybe a little deeper, unfortunately, like maybe a 2.25. I don't know how realistic that is without devastating our programs, but. Another.
Cutting a
not-
couple 100,000, will it impact? Of course. Are there reductions? That's our job then, to come back to you and find the least impactful cuts to get to that figure.
I'm just curious. I know we're meeting with the DCC tomorrow night. Have you shared any of this with anyone yet and heard any feedback at all?
This just got posted 2 hours ago, or 3 hours ago, so no. I did reach out to Tracy in Newbury to just say, it's Newbury's turn. We haven't had a detailed discussion yet, but I often reach out to the town that is going to get the brunt in any given year. So, but there hasn't been any discussion yet.
I do find it a little difficult to start talking about what we like to see before we do have the towns weigh in, to get their opinions on what these impacts are and what it looks like for them as well. And to have that conversation tomorrow night, I feel is very important for us to at least know what we should be thinking about and targeting as a number to start aiming towards.
Looking at these numbers, you're asking the towns to start with $883,000 for Newbury and Rowley. I can tell you right now that they're going to tell you to bring them down. I'm not sure that green columns are going to be what the town's going to be looking for tomorrow night.
It's Linda.
I looked at Narissa going to the mic and then.
I said that I really don't think the green columns are going to be viable for Newbury and Rowley or Salisbury being that high. And what Matt's has asked is for us to even go higher than that number.
No, lower.
Lower?
He wants one in between these.
Oh, one shut down, okay. Yeah. I think we're looking more towards the yellow to be realistic for our 3 towns. So I agree with what Matt says in between here, but I think we're more going to be between the yellow and the blue. I said that I think where the towns would probably be more comfortable is between the yellow and the blue. We'll see tomorrow night, but
So I think it has to be a part of a bigger conversation too, which would be my hope. I know it's hard not to look at it just a number, but there's cuts in here already that are going to affect the students in these towns. And I think that has to be a big part of this conversation, because any further cuts are just going to have further impact. And these are town services. Schools are town services. So I think we need to have that bigger conversation. In regard to what I'd like to see, looking at cutting almost $1 million from this budget would be, that's programs. I mean, we're not looking at cutting, you know, a teacher in each grade. Across one grade at the elementary schools or whatever exists in the green right now, we're going to be looking at cutting full programs. I personally would like to see that come almost off the table and have Matt's new 2.25 replace the yellow and the,
1.25. I'm in between the yellow and the green.
I know,
Oh, yeah.
2.25.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Scared me for a second.
Have that come in the yellow and then have the 2 million shift down to the blue. Because I just think, I mean, you know, you go where you got to go, but I don't love seeing that on there because it would be so devastating that I don't think we should consider that unless it's an absolute must. Like that's, right? That's pushing the red button to me. That's when you like hit the emergency button, like there's going to be a disaster. I don't want to hit that button because I don't, you know.
Well, I think what needs to be put out here is exactly what each of these numbers that we're talking about, what the cuts would be. I think it's much easier to determine what you want to have stay in when you come back with. I'm a visual person myself, so I need to see what actually having these coming where Matt had said, or between the blue and the green, what those cuts really look like. Because I think that's when you can really have that conversation of what you don't want to have cut. If you come back and say we're cutting a lot of programs at the high school, of course that isn't what we're going to want to see. So I think that's probably what we need to see is actually what you feel is going to be cut. I think that's the only way we can tell you what we feel should be put back in.
Yes, but I would also, sorry. Yes, but I would also, to Paul's point, last week you talked about the cuts being student-facing. So that's helpful feedback that ultimately, right, you have three primary roles, hire and fire me, hopefully focus on the hire, policy and budget, right? So this is one of the most, and arguably the most important thing you do. So having that type of feedback about what cuts you would be okay with approving or reductions or, right, the miracles are not happening this year. So we're going to be in one of these more challenging scenarios. So that type of discussion, and again, the 9 of you discussing this, 8 of you here, about your kind of collective, you're not, individual opinions are helpful. A collective discussion about what the 8 of you, 9 of you value is helpful as we go back and say, okay, maybe this one wouldn't be a cut then that would ultimately be supported, whether we believe it is or not. We can come back and argue that. But that's helpful is in framing our work over the next 6 days.
As I reviewed the video about what Paul had talked about and this Paul had spoke about, I know that he said student-facing. In the past, we have cut central office, and it caused central office to have to do more work, which meant less, you had too many eyes in too many places, and you weren't concentrating on what we needed to be concentrating on. To have anybody like Joelle for special ed, if we were to take somebody like that away, or, you know, I'm just using it as if we took Nicole away from you, that would force you and Shannon to have to do more things and be less effective for our student population. So it's hard for me to say, I mean, because I'm a STEM person. I hated to see the STEM person go, but I understand why that would be needed to be cut. And hopefully, at some point, we have a better grasp on science that we can implement better science into elementaries. I think it's a matter of having to think outside the box as to what we have to do. I can't tell you I mean, we don't want any programs, we don't want anything that's going to affect our students, but unfortunately, we can't go to the towns with an $883,000 unless we say, sorry, this is what we want, and we're not being mindful of what the towns can afford. Because I want to make sure that we go to a town meeting that the towns feel that we've listened to what they have to say. So I agree that we have to see what the towns are willing to pay, but they're going to want us to put as low as possible on there, so we have to decide what's important to us.
And Linda, I understand that too, and I think giving these, and as we were sitting here, I went back through this and I was circling a variety of different things on the items that you said that you were going to cut, and some of them are not filling educator positions that for retirees or somebody that has left and we've shifted somebody over, so we're eliminating the STEM position, that sort of thing. But this is all, this is already contemplated in that green, and it really is hard to say that we're going to cut even more, especially like Linda said, without knowing what exactly the program would be. And I think that we really need to express that to our community leaders and to the public, that this green section has already contemplated losing all these things that we had already had in place, and we said we were going to try and level fund. So.
I mean, and that, what we saw last week, that's leading to this green box is already cutting programming. It's 2 programs that we budgeted in for this year for a full year that didn't survive the year. And I mean, I expressed last week, especially that STEM, I think that's critical, and I think that SEL program is close to as critical in some ways, looking at the students who are receiving that or would be receiving that now, and when they graduate, what the world will require of them. And as Paul said last week, what we're seeing at the high school level in those students. But we're already talking about cutting programming, not just consolidating out from, the decreases in our enrollment at that, 2.5 number. And I'm already deeply uncomfortable with those cuts there. So, that's.
I have a question. So Brian, can you just refresh my memory about what happens if we go to town meeting and 2 of the towns do not approve their assessments?
So the budget returns to you. You have 7 days to reconsider it. We then have a couple days, 7 days, to recertify it. Our treasurer recertifies it to the towns, and the towns then have 45 days to reconvene a town meeting again. If they reconvene a town meeting and say no again, we go back to the drawing board and keep doing that. If they don't hold a meeting, it's a de facto yes. So if 2 of the towns, after we reconsider the budget, are like, yeah, it's okay, and don't hold a meeting, then the budget's approved. But it generally kicks it, if you do the timing, it generally kicks it well into May. Right, so the last town meeting is, so if Newbury and Rowley did not pass it first, we would know early on and would be able to redo that within the month of May and recertify that.
And so can you tell me what happened with the Whittier vote yesterday?
Can I tell you what happened with it?
No.
They have to do, or?
No, just what was the vote? What was the public's response?
By a 3-1 margin, it was a no.
There was a lot of mobilization of voters for that. Just throwing it out there.
I guess I would just say I feel like it's a little different. I think if we were doing a building project, I would feel like that sentiment if I'm receiving your intention there. I believe that sentiment would carry more so. I think for the operating budget, there's a different understanding. I'm not suggesting we try to put a $2.5 million increase out there. I agree. I think the towns will come in and say, guess what, you're having a tough year, so are we, right? All those same revenues that we're relying on, the local revenues are down too, so it's the same challenge for them. My guess is this is Brian speaking, pure hypothetical, my guess is that if we were to put forward that 2.6 number, all or most of our towns would need an override to fund that, would be my guess. So.
Marissa, you seem confused by what I said.
I am, because I feel like it's a completely different situation. I mean, this is what I heard when I was at the town meetings, was the town meetings were literally saying to the Whittier superintendent, but Triton does it this way. Why didn't you do it this way? Because it seemed like they felt like we had built the connections and had the communication and involved them in the decisions, and that was one of the strategic differences that they were drawing out as part of those conversations. So to say it's a similar situation, it's not.
I'm not saying it's a similar situation. I'm just saying that the people went to the polls to vote the issue down, and I'm concerned about that. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it's a similar situation. No, we go out of our way, and especially Brian and his staff, to be transparent and have these meetings and have DCC. So I'm not suggesting that there's equity in any of that. I'm just suggesting I'm concerned about what happened at the polls yesterday and what sentiment might be out there about town versus schools. That's all I'm trying to raise.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to hash Whittier's whatever here, but there was a call to the polls, right? That happened because that connection and that communication was not ongoing.
Okay?
I believe we have a much better relationship with our 3 towns. At least I would hope we have that. And tomorrow night, we will have a discussion with them about these numbers too, and I'm sure they will let us know exactly how they feel about which scenario that they would like. Not that what they say is we have to come and have what they say in mind, but we have to make sure that we're doing what's best for our students as well. Sure.
I just wanted to go back to what Linda said, and just, I know that the administration is generally very careful about that. I understand wanting to kind of quantify what a specific level of cuts would look like, but I also want to be cognizant of morale, just because I feel like once you start talking about a program or a particular set of cuts, that's not a retirement, that's not a replacement, people start feeling that, and I don't want to bring down morale as an exercise for the school committee. So I would hope that anything that you put forward as an example would be just so generic or general that it's not, you know, like talking about one classroom teacher at an elementary school when it's based on a retirement, I think is one thing. Saying, you know, we're cutting one middle school teacher or whatever, where there's no retirements is a completely different thing, or narrowing it further than that, or talking about a particular program. So I hope we can be cognizant of not bringing, you know, concern before it's necessarily due. Maybe it is due at some point, but I don't want to bring that now if we don't have to.
I appreciate that. I guess I would say, I don't think there's a lot of areas left for us to go to, right? This is the second year of proposing level funding for all supplies and materials. Costs are up 15% over the last 2 years. So we've already cut those, to your point last week, Paul, right? So there is no supply line for us to go after. There's no, let's shift something to a revolving account because we've got a healthy balance avenue. So it literally is, we are primarily, 85% of our budget is personnel. And so If you look at our elementary schools, we're largely at 3 sections per grade level. It makes it very hard to go to 2. When you're going from 5 to 4, the numbers are much more easily worked with, and we could say, we're going to trim a couple sections. Don't anyone worry yet. At this point, I think it will be hard for us to, and right, we have to do it as part of the process, but it will be hard for us to come back next week. I will tell you, we will be coming back next week with further reductions, from what I'm hearing, and we will have had conversations with specific people, because that's the only way we can do it at this point, unfortunately.
So I think, obviously, I spoke last week and felt that option number 1 was insufficient, so I think it's clear where I stand on all of blue and yellow there. I guess I just want to say this, and at the risk of bringing some familial rivalry back into this, police and fire seem never to be afraid of going to the towns and saying what they need. And I just know, growing up, which of my parents, firefighter, teacher, got the pink slip every year. At the very least, I think we need to communicate to the towns that this green is not what we need, so that they are operating from an understanding that, okay, we don't want to pay 800, then they need to be able to say, we're not able to give you what you need. We're not able to fund the schools at the level you need. I want that to be the message that they say, so that it's clear. Because if that's really going to be the sentiment, if that's really going to be what they're doing, I don't know. I mean, to me, we have a moral obligation to sacrifice where we can to give to the next generation. That's every one of us sitting here, every one of us who attends town meeting is there because they either were lucky enough to go to a private school, or someone sacrificed for them to go to a public school. And it's a moral obligation to give back. And if that's not something the towns are willing to do, they need to know that that's what they're not doing. And I don't know.
Does anybody else have any direction to give to Brian and his team?
Can I ask another question then? One follow-up thought to what I was saying, answering your question, Narissa. Last week, there were some unclear pieces in the presentation, and it led people to make assumptions. So I think that's even more reinforcing my point that we have to have direct conversations with people, because then I can say, if you haven't heard from us, you are not currently impacted in anything we're discussing. So my question is this. Last week, the total number of reductions was $866,000. Is there anything in that list that you believe is an absolute, I could never vote for that reduction? And then the follow-up would be, do we add that in and create a new high water mark? Or would you suggest that we swap those reductions out and come with a new way of getting to that figure? Is that a clear question?
Is there is there a hybrid version of that what you just said, where, because I think it's, Paul, you know where I stand because I said stay green. And so I'm looking at alternates. You don't, what if you say, like, we're going to keep X, and then you come back and you come back with Z, and Z's horrifying to the group. So is there like a way just to see it all on paper? Like, you cut so much money from this, and you have found a similar reduction elsewhere, and that's kind of like a hybrid version of what you just read, rather than like the and/or, where does that make sense?
It does. So I'm not saying,
I'm not, like, my
don't
brain
tell
is-
me, hey, go cut Brian instead.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, like,
I just want to know if there are any, we can't do that. right? Sixth grade teacher, right? Is that a, we cannot do class sizes of 25 at grade 6?
I mean, what's the alternative? I guess that's my question. Like, right now, look, given this list, there are things I could say, like, I never want to see this happen. But then the alternative, I always get very
Absolutely.
nervous. It's unknown, and it could be horrifying, and then I'm back to, well, I didn't love this either. So
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with that, like, yeah, you know what, without knowing where Brian's brain is and where, like, the administrative, well, horrified, don't go there. But do you know what I,
So let me rephrase the
like, I don't
question.
know where you're going with that, so I'm uncomfortable answering that question.
Yeah, and I'm not, I mean, it's not to hold people
No,
to it.
but-
It's, so what are the most concerning things on this list? If I would assess based on my conversations last week, I felt concern about the sixth grade classes at 25, 26. Right, at Newbury and Pine Grove, they're at 25, 26. At Salisbury, they'd be 19, 20. I heard like real genuine concern about that. I heard concern, but I kind of get it, about SEL and the STEM teachers. So that, I think, of course.
So I have concern when I see that we're losing special ed teachers and instructional assistants, not knowing what the coverage looks like when these positions are gone. And I know that the special ed teachers are listed as not replacing retired educators. So I do have concern.
So I would tell you those, based on caseloads, if you look at the numbers in the back, and then the little note with the instructional assistants, there's no change in required services for students. So whether it be a shift, so those shifts would be being made regardless of the budget year. Right, so that, if you look at the average caseload, and again, it's not, you can't just go straight numbers, but the average caseload at Newbury Elementary for non-special programs is over 10 per special educator. Reducing the 2 at Salisbury, it takes it to 7. So we still maintain a smaller student-teacher ratio at Salisbury with those 2 reductions. There was some very specialized, I'm not going to say it's one-on-one, that whether it's a student transition, there was a few students who've transitioned to other programs. And so those are efficiency reductions, not a change in services. Is that a fair summary there, Shannon? I'm not lying. Okay. I want to make sure you weren't coughing, trying to get my attention. Right, so that's a change that is due to Salisbury Elementary is the smallest elementary school in the district right now. That's a huge shift where Salisbury is, as a community, is shrinking. They're not choicing kids out to other schools, they're not, right? It's just, as a community, it's becoming a much larger beach community, retiree age, still growing like the other towns in the area, but the school-age population is shrinking. So we're moving fairly quickly towards Rowley being, right, when you look at those proportionate shares, if you take the 3 elementaries and age those kids through middle school and high school, Rowley will be the largest portion of the district, then Salisbury, and then Newbury. Newbury's elementary is larger, but there's more students choiced in there. So if you took the choice students out, Newbury is the smallest school, but not that much smaller than Salisbury now, under 400 students. So that's right sizing. I would be proposing that. What I would love to be is in a year where we propose it and we reallocate that funding and create a new position. That's not the year we're in, so that's a reduction.
I think everyone's heard me say that STEM position, and look, Newbury got that position, the full cycle this fall, and the other towns didn't. And I was in that elementary school a bunch and seeing that, like, and knowing the cognitive thinking that goes into teaching that. I look at that as an essential ad that we did 2 years ago, not a nice. So that, and then 1A below that, thinking about the environment that our students are heading into when they leave here is that SEL position and that ability to be healthy. And then the third on that list, is the sixth grade. That's concerning. But I have a hard time imagining what you would put on a list of cuts instead of STEM, where I would say, oh no, go back to STEM, and SEL is like just a slice below that.
I should have said too, right, the discussions that we've been having on the leadership team since we put the document together a week and a half ago, the original proposal when it was published on that Friday, we've continued to have discussions about, okay, where else can we, I'll tell you, it's consolidating responsibilities. That's the savings, right? There isn't, as I said, lines where we can just chop supplies or materials or contracted services for special education. It's people. So that has been an ongoing, so there are the thoughts we've had, certainly. And based on tonight's conversation, we'll certainly bring different thoughts to you next week.
And that may be what you come back with, that we really, you make a couple more cuts and you say, I honestly don't think we can cut any more than what we have because of A or B. The cuts that you proposed last week were difficult to see, but I guess if you were going to make the cuts that were needed, those were probably the ones that, I know other people will disagree with me, but were the ones that were going to have least impact on schools as they currently are. So if you don't hire hire the teachers to replace them, other than the sixth grade that made it larger, that some of the things that you did were at least going to leave the existing people still intact. I mean, I don't know what it is that I would say that you cut instead of the STEM teacher or instead of the SEL teacher. Because I'm sure there's not a lot of places that you can take from.
So would it make sense, am I hearing, summarizing, I'm hearing the concerns about the specific educators. We talked about, the various cuts that made up the 866 from last week. I'm hearing 2482 is the high water mark, 2 million is the low water mark, and we're going to do a new number two that is between the two, roughly 200 and 2.25. So if we come back with those scenarios and the reductions we would make to get to each of those, no?
I'm going to be the bad guy here and just say I've been on the committee for a really long time, and I'm confused about why the budget season seems to feel like it's so crunched this year, because normally we're heading for the high water mark in mid-February, and now I'm feeling like we need to have a final budget decided by mid-February, and I'm confused about why it is such a time crunch. Is there a reason? Because normally at this point, we'd be saying, we're just starting into this process. We need to hear what the towns say. And then we're heading for a high water mark in mid-February and still seeing how things shake out and having those conversations go on. And we have a long time to deal with this, rather than I feel like just the way people are talking right now, I feel like we have this meeting and next meeting, and then there's a decision. And that's not the timeline, so I guess I'm confused.
I kind of share that, Brian, only because this time of the year in the past, it was the, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we heard, from the teachers, and it does seem like it's sort of pushed back really soon, rather, not push back, push forward, I guess. So
I think part of the issue is there was nothing for the principals to say that
oh, no, I get that.
needed to add.
No, I get that. I know why that change came about. I'm just, what Narissa said, I'm in agreement with that. It seems like we're needing to get to a vote earlier than we have in the past.
I mean, I'm okay with bringing these things to tomorrow night and having a discussion. We can have a discussion with them, with the DCC.
Absolutely, and I would say, right, so I will apologize for my part if I'm moving this too quickly. I'm more than happy to slow down.
When do we lose Connor?
Right? There's no clock ticking. Was that the bitterness face? That was the bitterness face.
I'm seeing you over like, chop, chop. Let's go, Brian.
So yes, maybe there is a little urgency. So there is,
So it's
right.
Kyle's fault.
Plan B,
It's already red.
No. Linda just said it was Brian's fault.
no, Kyle's fault. Oh, this thing not working? Okay, rethink this scenario then. There is no need to your point, Narissa, about alarming to people too early, right? So this is Brian's realistic face. We're going to be cutting more, right? There's no way, knowing and having our conversations with our towns, I would love, and I'm happy to have those discussions with towns, right? And it's my job to propose and find that balance of what's needed and what's available or what's we are able to be accomplished. Maybe it's my realistic side saying, let's just cut to the chase like we did with the whole presentation, because we're going backwards this year rather than the usual, let's talk about what's needed. You're right, we do have two more full discussions. We have a discussion on the 31st and a discussion on the 6th. We can do nothing new. We can bring this document as is to the towns, right? It's already public, so they have this.
But if we already said that we want those numbers changed, I wouldn't show them this and then come back with the different numbers next time. Like
Say that again?
We're going to do the 2.25 as a suggestion, and then the low mark would be the 2. I wouldn't go with them to a 1.5, a 2, and a 2.5.
But tomorrow night we have a meeting.
Yes.
And it would be nice to show them that this is
Right.
the
Yeah.
start of the process, and
I don't think you can have different
But
discussions than you
I
presented.
foresee someone holding on to this blue category throughout the entire process and never moving away from that. No, you and I both get that, but we already know that some of the personalities that we have will take blue and move forward with blue, as is.
well, we will have a discussion tomorrow night, and just saying that these are the start of our budget season, these are for discussion. And we're keeping transparency so that they can see how we're progressing along. Yeah?
I agree with Aaron.
You want to jump in? Because the one actual thing that we've kind of all had consensus on was the 1A conversation brought on by Matthew. So, and so I don't want to go to the towns, and I do agree it could feel a little false considering they could watch this video back and know that we all kind of had that consensus of, like, that blue box is catastrophic. And, I mean, to me, the yellow box is catastrophic, but as a consensus of the whole committee, that blue box was, like, something we probably could not attain while serving students in 3 communities. So I'm just concerned that if any of our community members watched this video, and then we only brought this to the towns, that it seems not genuine. I don't know, maybe that's just my take on it, like, and I don't know if you can put like an addendum that says, in last night's meeting, we discussed removing the, like, to be even more, I just want transparency, because we had a big discussion about it.
Yeah, my only concern would be bringing something to the towns that you didn't have a discussion about first. So I agree to your point. I'm hearing that green and yellow is the new high and low, and there's a midpoint. Easy, because it's just a recalculation. We're not coming back with new cuts of how we would achieve that, right? None of that. But to say, here's, as of last night, this is how the committee feels, as though they're targeting the high water mark. You have the proposal, obviously we have the proposal from last week. And we can even, convey the fact that there were concerns shared about the cuts that are on this paper to get to the green. So that's very doable, and we obviously can easily do that for tomorrow night. And we walk into those meetings with documents, so that's easily done tomorrow night if folks think that makes the most sense. Narissa?
I think that, I just want to say, I think that is the transparent option, to say that we had this conversation, and this is, at least for now, off the table. Like, this is not an item for consideration. So if you want to know kind of where the committee's brain actually is as far as the options we're considering, it would be the new 1A, and 2. And I don't know, to me, that's the transparent thing, not to say we're carrying this document over just because we had it last night. We had it last night, things changed. This is where kind of the committee's brain is right now. So this is what you have in front of you, because that is, I don't know, to me, that is, that's being honest, right? You don't want an option on here that the committee's not going to, a nuclear option, right? That the committee's not going to consider unless whatever, right? Like, I can't see getting to the point. Yeah, unless there's no alternative. I can't see getting to the point where $1 million worth of cuts would be considered, because that's going to be devastating to the district. And honestly, like, we need more money just for this building to keep it functioning. So I don't know, like, that's included in here. And I would hate to see that be one of the cuts, just because, right, you can't cut back on the maintenance in this building anymore.
No. I never thought about the bathrooms. I don't even think I even sent you all an email that on Sunday afternoon, during a building check, door 3, which is the overhang, door 1 is the middle school main entrance, and then the one to the right of the overhang, door 3 is to the arch. That corner of the building downstairs, the bathrooms, one of the drains filled up and backed up, so that corner of the building filled up. It made it all the way to the halls and to the start of the classrooms, and then it was found. So, yeah, we definitely cannot reduce the repair line for this building.
So what I'm hearing for you, Brian, is to come back with between the green and the yellow for tomorrow night.
So we will not identify any more, obviously, we're going to continue doing the work, obviously, but we will not come and have any more public discussion next week about other cuts, correct? We're going to hear from the towns, have further discussion next Wednesday, and then between the 31st and the 6th, we'll come to you with, we'll make additions or subtractions. We'll keep our options open.
And you'll come tomorrow night with a paper for,
So we'll have, obviously, the proposal from last week, these 2 documents. The edited, corrected one is now posted on Board Docs. The minimum locals, and we talked about this. This is a huge driver for these increase. And then this version updated with high, low, and a new 1A. Yeah?
does anybody have any other discussions on that?
I just wonder if it'd be worthwhile to send out a special notice to the towns about the need for their presence tomorrow night.
I'll definitely send a reminder in the morning. I sent a message out rather than the routine email that Nicole sends out. I sent a message just saying, reminder, this is the DCC, this is the meeting where we kick everything off. So, but we can send another reminder with these documents tomorrow morning, for sure.
Any other discussion? We have a district communication meeting tomorrow night at 6:30 in Salisbury, as well as a school committee meeting next Wednesday, January 31st. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Can I say one thing? So this feels awful timing to do this. So next week, the good news is we've found Kyle's replacement, and I will be posting, his name will be in the agenda on Friday, You remember, I recommend for an appointment, and you have to approve that. So he will be coming next Wednesday night. And my gosh, it feels like hey, and we're welcoming, his name is Brian, too. My gosh. It's spelled with a Y, not an I. So we're going to go with like the first and the second, kind of like the Pauls do. But it feels really weird to be doing this and then have him sitting here talking about the doom and gloom. But that is good news that we found a very highly qualified replacement for Kyle. And we're excited about it. I think he'll be great. So more on that next week. You gone already? No, just go.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Have a nice evening.